collective event, Stop Genocide, Free Palestine.
Yeah.
We're going to be discussing, obviously, the events that unfolded since October 7th, and even before and even since, but October 7th has marked the date where the United States and Israel have basically been trying to freeze time and just single-mindedly focus on the single date where 1,200 people were killed by Hamas when they broke out. But what happened since then is over 18,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel's genocidal campaign. But what happened before that is decades and decades of genocidal attacks on Palestinian land and life. And we want to sort of emphasize how we're fighting this, it's like battle against lies, but also genocide that are simultaneously taking place. And in the United States, we have a bigger role than most other countries, given the, United States is essentially singularly allowing this genocide to take place by limitless military and political aid to the state of Israel, which is an apartheid state that is currently committing genocide. Our speakers are going to speak more broadly on this topic and how they're fighting for Palestinian solidarity and keep it alive in this country. Our first speaker is going to be Shireen Akram-Boshar, who's a socialist, activist, writer, and an editor based in Boston, well now Houston, I believe. She's a member of the Tempest Collective and on the editorial board of Spector journal. I suppose I'll just go ahead and introduce everybody while I'm at it. Sherry Wolf is a member of Tempest and JVP New York, Jewish Voices for Peace, and is a longtime anti-Zionist Jewish organizer for BDS and Palestinian Liberation. Currently a labor organizer at Rutgers, Sherry is working with both students and faculty for Justice in Palestine and her union, AAU-PAFT, to fight the university and federal government's crackdown on dissent and Palestine organizing. Vanessa Guaraca is a third-year philosophy student at the New School. She's a member of her university's Students for Justice in Palestine chapter and an organizer for the New Student Workers Union. And Sarah El Shafie is an Egyptian-American public school teacher in New York City, as a UFT delegate, a member of the movement of rank and file educators, and a founding member of NYC Educators for Palestine. She's working to create a more liberatory spaces in education. So Shireen will get us going and give us an overview of what's been going on, and I will be seated. And each presenter will have about a 10-minute talk, and then we will have discussion. Sure.
Israel's onslaught of Gaza can only be described as an extermination campaign, as it has worked to forcibly displace 90% of Gaza's population as of right now. Bombed Gaza's major cities and their infrastructure to the ground, and slaughtered over close to 19,000 Palestinians, I believe now, including intentionally killing many of Gaza's prominent doctors, scientists, researchers, journalists, writers, professors, and poets in a cultural genocide as well. Israel has aimed to make Gaza completely uninhabitable as it takes a step forward in its colonial project, a project based on ethnic cleansing and forced displacement. This genocidal campaign has irreversibly destroyed Gaza, but it has also shifted the political terrain globally. It has created a larger and much clearer division between those in power who are supporting Israel's brutal war on Palestine and the millions of their populations who are demanding its end. And it has given us a sense of what an activated movement for Palestine can look like and what is still needed to get to the movement we need. We've seen a sea change with international protests, with 500,000 people regularly protesting in the streets of London, to give perhaps the starkest example, in utter contempt of the governments who fund and greenlight Israel's genocide, and continuous protest and direct action across the US as well for the past 2 months at a scale that we haven't seen before. This moment has reminded us why Palestine is an issue of global significance, why it resonates with people globally and impacts the entire world. It's not only an issue of oppression and standing on the side of justice, but also a clear case of imperialism and of complicity of the world's imperialist powers, as well as of colonialism. The current moment has clarified that Palestine is a question of racism, imperialism, and colonialism in spite of the blatant use of Islamophobic propaganda over the last 2 months, and the decades upon decades of misleading and obfuscating messaging about the conflict, the so-called conflict in the Western media. People are not falling for it anymore. People of color and young people especially have a sharper understanding of oppression thanks to movements like the Black Lives Matter uprisings, and are no longer falling for the two sides nonsense that erases the reality that an ethno-state that has taken the land of another people with the support of imperial powers and can only continue its brutal existence through force and through continued massacres and racist double standards. And this moment has provided clarity for many within the US on US politics and politicians and on their relationship to Israel. It's provided clarity on where the Democrats stand. Biden, who was not too long ago widely agreed upon as a lesser evil, is now understood as complicit and responsible for this ongoing genocide. He's lost the Arab vote and the youth vote, and is now, as of this week, polling behind Trump. This is, of course, after he repeated to the US public the already debunked lie about beheaded Israeli babies, and in addition to that, he cast doubt on the Gaza healthcare system's recorded numbers of Palestinians killed. And this is as the US, over the past week, the US vetoed the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire, which the UK abstained and all other members voted in favor of. 2 nights ago, Biden's own staffers protested in front of the White House, demanding a ceasefire. Bernie was also, until October, seen as an alternative, but his cowardice has further revealed the Democratic Party's unwillingness to extricate itself from its relationship with Israel. For 10 weeks, Bernie refused to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Only after increasing disapproval and numerous protests against him in his home state did he timidly say the term humanitarian ceasefire this week, which was still too little too late. To move forward, any movement in solidarity with Palestine must understand that the Democratic Party is tied to imperialism and to Israel as Israel, which is an extension of US imperial power in the Middle East. And therefore, we must understand the total futility of waiting on and relying on the Democrats. So we need to cease relying on US politicians and on the Democrats in our hopes for Palestinian liberation. It is international resistance from below that is key, not politicians in any one state or another. We should be clear that Palestinian liberation will come from 3 forces. The first is Palestinian struggle, which has a long history since before 1948 and has taken a variety of forms, perhaps the most effective of which was during the 1936 Great Revolt and then the First Intifada. And both of those instances included general strikes, mass participation, and grassroots leadership and popular committees. But the reality is the possibilities for Palestinian struggle that can effectively lead to liberation have been narrowed for a number of reasons. Among them, Israel's fragmentation of the West Bank and Gaza into enclaves that make unified struggle that much more difficult. Israel's deliberate decision to exclude Palestinians from much of Israel's labor force, making a Palestinian general strike capable of, some revenue loss, but not complete halting of Israel's economy. And also because of the aftermath of the 1993 Oslo Accords, which brought about a complicit Palestinian bourgeois leadership in the West Bank. So many avenues toward Palestinian resistance have been closed before October 7th. Many had been tried, all of them had been vilified, and many were made impossible. This makes Palestinian liberation all the more contingent on and reliant upon the other 2 forces, and the next of which is mass popular uprising across the Middle East and North Africa region. So Palestinian liberation is a threat not only to Israel and to the US, but to the entire oppressive status quo of the Middle East and North Africa region, which rests on a tightrope of imperial control and dictatorial regimes. This is why the leaders of the region have seen Palestinian liberation and solidarity with Palestine as a threat to their rule and stability. For decades, the regimes have paid lip service to the Palestinian cause while actively clamping down on Palestine solidarity. used as an excuse for a decades-long state of emergency that worked to quash any potential popular organizing. In Egypt and Jordan over the past 2 months, this dynamic has also been clear, with state repression, beatings, and arrests of activists who tried to reach the border in solidarity with Palestine. Never mind also decades of Egyptian regime complicity in keeping the Rafah crossing to Gaza shut. And across the region, we see the regimes in limbo right now over their planned normalization deals, not because they don't want to push forward with them, but because of the massive pressure they're experiencing of popular outrage and solidarity. The Palestinian cause has long inspired uprisings across the region, which reflect first solidarity with Palestine and then turn a mirror onto the conditions at home that they're facing. So upending the status quo in the region means regional uprising like that of which we saw in 2011 with the Arab Spring revolutions, where mass popular mobilization showed the potential of creating an entirely different order on a different foundation. It therefore also requires a stronger international left prepared to support all progressive uprisings against all of the region's despots, not apologizing for one regime or another. The third force needed for Palestinian liberation is, of course, international struggle, active movements in support of the BDS movement, and for us here in the US, struggle against the US role in the Middle East. US solidarity with Palestine has, I would say, moved forward in leaps and bounds over the past 2 months, and that could be seen with, for example, the UAW resolution calling for a ceasefire, which would have been unheard of in previous years. It's become popularized, the idea that, you know, we're funding Israel, but not our own communities, not our own healthcare, not our own education. So I guess I want to leave us with, what would it take to get sectors in the US to strike for Palestine?
I want to really focus on a couple of points that I'm thinking about and share them with you, and we'll think together in the discussion. One is to talk about the weaponization of anti-Semitism to attempt to justify and defend what is happening right now. And the other one is to talk about the state of the movement and how, right now in this country, and what might be done to shift things a little bit, and what is happening as we're having this conversation. Regarding the weaponization of anti-Semitism, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that people in this room, because there's been so many conversations about this, I've talked about it, other people have talked about it, Haymarket Books has had a great session about it this last week, The Dig as well, about the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So I'm taking as a given here that this is not the crowd in which that is an argument, but we can certainly talk about it in discussion and flesh out our own thoughts about it. But I want to talk about the weaponization of it, because it's become even more, it's always been there. It escalated, its origins are more deeply rooted in 67, after the 67 war and the occupation of the territories, and Israel proving itself in the eyes of the world, and most centrally, the eyes that matter most, of course, in the world, the US government's eyes, the empire's eyes, that it was capable and willing of committing murder and having a war-making machine that could take on the forces in the region and take care of US oil that has somehow wound up under Arab feet. So the weaponization of anti-Semitism is not new, okay? But it is intensifying alongside of our side, because they have to. Not least of which because there's literally nothing else in their arsenal to defend this, because we're all walking around with little devices that are screening something that no human being anywhere in the world have ever watched play out. This is the first time in human history that a genocide is happening in our hands. We're watching it, we're able to see it. Even if you try and avoid it, you can't. It's ubiquitous. People may draw different conclusions and imbibe in different amounts of it, but it's impossible to ignore. And I think that we have to grapple with that fact that this has been going on for some decades, even with the loosening up and the shift, and I want to talk about the monumental shift in ideological and the support in this country, in particular over these last few months and last few years. But that's been manifested through these protests and mass eruptions of social upheaval and solidarity in Palestine. But it's become even more urgent to double down, and that's why we're seeing Congress and 38 states now with laws passed against, BDS. It's not illegal to say it, but, if you're at an institution that is publicly funded, they could lose their funding. They have ways of doing this. It's become so much more important because obviously the U.S. is the central power backing Israel, right? 20% of its own military arms come from the United States, the money and the financing, and of course the global cover and its point of service. It is quite literally, as Netanyahu repeated and has been repeated many times over, an aircraft carrier for U.S. imperialism in the Middle East. They actually say things quite honestly in Hebrew that never get translated into English, or rarely, certainly not in the pages of the New York Times. So it is so crucial to them because there is still, because of Holocaust education in this country and because of movies like Shoah and Schindler's List and all of the history that people have learned about the horrors of the Holocaust, that there is empathy with that for a good reason. And people don't want to see or have not have the blinders taken off to see what Israel is, that it is not some sort of result of the aspiration of some 2,000-year yearning of Jews. It's not the result of some national liberation movement of Jews in the Middle East. It was always and ever a colonial project. It's what it called itself. It was what it was. And to this day, needs to try and tie itself to Judaism in order to sort of justify its very existence right now. And it's doing a rather poor job of it. But again, let us not underestimate the resources, the power, the politics behind what could be lost in this relationship being severed between the United States and Israel. And that is why they are doubling down. And that is why even where I work at Rutgers, this is not Brown, this is not Harvard, this is not Penn, this is not an Ivy. This is a state university in a blue state. It's not Florida, it's not Texas. This is widely considered a more progressive state, a unionized state. It's a unionized university that just had the first strike in 257 years of its faculty. That won. That is now undergoing a federal investigation for discrimination on campus, aka charges of anti-Semitism, and it's just shut down. Where it's suspended, hasn't shut down. We'll get to that in a moment. It's Students for Justice in Palestine. So, because the stakes are so huge in what Shireen was talking about, the importance of that relationship, that they cannot allow it to be severed. And so they're screaming anti-Semitism and they're screaming Hamas even louder and more vociferously than ever, because they are terrified about what I'm going to talk about next. And that is an absolutely unprecedented transformational moment, and not moment, but period, that we are seeing kind of punctuated by these protests that really began in 2005 with the initiative of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. There's simply no question that the mass, understanding among younger people in particular in this country, but more broadly in this country, of Palestine as a civil rights issue would have been unthinkable without the boycott, divestment, sanctions strategy over this last 18 years that has created this sort of human material and an ideological shift in consciousness to allow for the absolute explosion of unprecedented numbers in the streets of New York and Chicago and St. Louis and Boston and Philly and on and on and on. And I want to say two things about it. Number one, it is unprecedented and it's extraordinary. And the labor component of it is particularly notable and important and unprecedented in this moment. But there's another thing that we kind of have to talk about since we're all together and we're comrades and we need to be honest with each other. We're also at a moment, 10 weeks in, of despair. We have had record protests for Palestine in DC of 300,000. I was there, it was brilliant. We have had extraordinary acts of mass civil disobedience, not once, but multiple times in multiple cities on multiple days, that has shut down, Grand Central Station, Manhattan Bridge, the Bay Bridge, whatever the hell it's called in Boston, that thing in Philly. What? Sorry, it's such a horrible New Yorker. And then there's other places. These mass protests, these mass disruptions, mass civil disobedience, mass arrests repeatedly happening haven't stopped the genocide.
Right.
Okay? And that, especially after the pause, our Thanksgiving pause, the irony is just horrifying. I think a certain despair, not of giving up. People are still mobilizing. I just came from a protest today, 2 protests. But the numbers are not as large, and the sentiment of like, oh my God, what will it take? We've done something we've never done before. In London, they're doing it over and over again in hundreds of thousands, and good God, look at Yemen and Indonesia and on and on. What would it take? They're still ignoring. 2/3 of the American population is against this genocide. This is not a popular. We're not going to call it a war. It's not a popular genocide. Genocide, not a good seller. Not a real seller. But what we don't yet see is the mass sentiment and sympathy with the Palestinian people and horror that people feel at the images that they're seeing turned into the level of disruption and the level of organized resistance that would be needed in order to truly shut shit down and truly sever this relationship. To me, the development over this last week of the labor unions coming on board, UAW obviously the most prominent of them because it's the international union. In the AFT, there's now dozens of locals. The one I work for is one of them. PSC CUNY last night, the August Assembly voted overwhelmingly for ceasefire, Mazel Tov. The postal workers, blah, 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 blah. But what we are only starting to see is a crack in it going from statements to acts of solidarity and coordinated acts. Because what we have all honestly seen is absolutely robust, extraordinary organizing and leadership from Palestinian, particularly youth, and young Arabs and Muslims in the streets. Extraordinary and unprecedented leadership and mobilization and arrest levels from Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, and now the beginnings of labor, but they're not happening together. This is not a coordinated, united front resistance to this genocide, and that is where we need to take things. That is where things need to go. And to me, the beginnings of the sort of cross-endorsements of labor groups and Palestinian groups and JVP over these last days, which is new, and we all know, we would love to be able to be in a position to see a call for a general strike go out and have it heeded by thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands. But we'd be lying to ourselves if we said that that call could go out tomorrow and be heeded by those kinds of numbers. That level of organizing, that level of trust, that level of credibility with each other, that level of connection must be built over time. And I'm sorry that it's only starting for some groups and some forces right now. But we, I believe, can't despair, because this really is going to be a long-term struggle. Whenever the bombs do stop dropping, and God, I hope it's soon, what are we going to be left with? Mass cholera, dysentery, starvation, the impacts of, can people live on rubble and rebuild in Gaza? I don't think so. Where will people go? How will they be governed? How will they live? What will be the future politics of this? That is going to be determined by the organizations of dissent that we build in this moment. Which is why I'm happy to say that at places like Rutgers, where you see the McCarthyism sort of coming at us, you also see the resistance rising to take shape. Faculty for Justice in Palestine announces itself hours after the SJP gets attacked. The Rutgers for students in Palestine also coming on the streets. The largest demonstrations are now since they've been attacked, where Black and Latinx and Jewish and other students are coming out and saying, we are all SJP. These are the steps. This is going to be the way of building lasting infrastructures of dissent, as we like to say, that we're going to be able to build the kind of united front that is going to be necessary to have the sort of job actions, disruptions, mass disobedience in order to face this next wave of what we're up against and the sort of rising fears and legitimate fears of fascism and far-right, politics entering the very heights of U.S. society. So that's where I'll leave my comments here, and we'll have more discussion later.
Hi everyone, thank you guys for coming. Thank you to Keegan for inviting our SJP. We actually ran into him in Bay Ridge. So yeah, thank you guys. Like at a protest, that's when we met. So yeah, thank you for having us. So I'm from the New School SJP, SJP is basically a national organization with around 200 chapters across different college campuses, with the aim to build an organized Palestinian solidarity movement and ultimately to get our universities to boycott and divest from corporations that are complicit in and profiting from the genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. I joined SJP as a freshman, so 2 years ago. The group was a friend group of maybe 8 people coming to meetings. Our most popular event had like 20 people who came for a poetry night in 2021. And around October 7th, we were actually in the middle of reviving our SJP because we weren't a registered student org anymore. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing has been kind of channeling this new unprecedented level of interest and support, and being able to sort of focus that on like different screenings and teach-ins and events, but also actions. And so our first demonstration was a walkout in early November with about 500 people in attendance. And at this walkout is where we released demands to our administration. So these included calling on the admin to publicly acknowledge Israel as a settler colony, as a state enacting apartheid and engaging in a genocidal campaign, instead of calling it an Israel-Hamas war, as we received in our emails from admin. We also were demanding academic integrity from the New School as an institution, and that they be precise in their language when discussing the struggle of the Palestinian people. And we also called on the New School to commit to protecting free speech. Also a demand to end the partnership with the Israel Conservatory of Music, on the grounds that we reject collaboration with cultural institutions complicit in the occupation. And finally, that the Board of Trustees disclose their financial ties between the university and the State of Israel. Our university president responded with an email about a week later, after our members went into her office and bothered her, with no, yeah. I'll just do it. With no disclosure of our finances, she emailed us and vaguely claimed that our tuition dollars are not funding international conflict, and then further framed us as violent, disruptive bullies who are threatening the community. And I'd also like to point out that this is the New School. The New School claims to be one of the most progressive academic institutions. We also had an adjunct faculty strike last year. There have been probably like 3 occupations, student occupations since the 2000s. And so for this to be happening at the New School is something that I find extremely worrisome. But yeah, we further responded to our president that we have a right to be informed about where our tuition money is invested in, and our administration has a duty to be transparent. Student workers, faculty, and staff have been demanding transparency about our university finances. This was a huge point during the strike and the following student occupation, like last year. And so our SJP decided to do a week of action, and on December 4th, organized another walkout demanding that the New School disclose their endowment investments, followed by a peaceful sit-in at 3 university buildings. The sit-in at the main campus building was 4 hours long, and during the action, we were physically harassed, assaulted, shoved, spat at. Organizers were pushed, punched, endured a lot of Islamophobia and homophobic hate speech. And a few hours in, the director of student conduct entered the building, and she handed us a notice of policies and threatened all of us with sanctions ranging from warnings to expulsion. So instead of protecting student protesters from violence, the new school began investigating the sit-in and charged our SJP with multiple student conduct violations. This is unprecedented at the new school. No student organization has ever been charged with policy violations. It's also unheard of at our school for an administration to be sending out emails about these guidelines. There have been multiple occupations in which this has not happened before. But this is all just a lack of acknowledgement of our institutional role in allowing genocide to happen and instead punishing organizers for civil disobedience. And this is part of ultimately a larger effort to intimidate, repress, and silence pro-Palestinian organizing on college campuses across the US. And it's honestly exactly what we expected to happen. Our interim president, Donna Shalala, is a former politician, and she served in Bill Clinton's cabinet. But our universities are American institutions, and they are not interested in protecting free speech or protecting students. They have a financial and political interest in militarism and imperialism. And what they want is for us to be scared of their retaliation. They want us as students to think that we are wrong for questioning their institutional role in funding genocide. But this is because they're terrified, and they are desperate to silence us. But this is having an opposite effect. It's only showing the power of the student movement, and it's increasingly obvious to all of us as students that we are being failed by our institutions. And so amidst this threat of SJP being suspended across the US and increasing backlash, we're sort of reflecting in this moment to think about our role as students within this movement and thinking about how our strategies need to focus on building a sustainable mass movement in support of divestment and in support of Palestinian liberation. One that's based on coalition building and relationships between organizing. I also organize with the New Student Workers Union, which is an effort to build a wall-to-wall student workers union, which would include undergrad student workers like housing workers, alongside academic workers at the new school. We're currently waiting on a decision as to whether or not we will form or as to whether or not the union will actually be formed. But something that our organizing committee decided to do was to bring the letter written by rank and file UAW members calling on the UAW to actually implement BDS, because simply calling for a ceasefire is not enough. And so we put that to a vote within our members, and it passed overwhelmingly. But something that both SJP and the Student Workers Union have been thinking about is this focus on building relationships with other clubs and other orgs on campus, such as YDSA, which recently popped up at the new school, and BSU. Creating these networks is where we can actually show up for each other. Building a network is, where was I going with that? Creating these networks is where we can actually show up for each other at actions, and when we need support, we're there for each other. And so for us, one of these, this could actually look like having town halls for all of the organizers to attend, meet each other, and figure out how we can actually support each other and collaborate together. And further, these need to not just be interpersonal relationships with individuals. One of the very difficult things with student organizing is that we're only here for a few years, and then we graduate, and then we move on. But instead, we need to have organizations that establish certain points of political unity that actually bring us together. And also as SJP, being able to draw connections from not just Free Palestine, but we are against imperialism worldwide, and how this is all of our fights. I think it's also notable that a significant portion of students attending our events or actions are not just regulars who attend organizing meetings. There's this whole new interest in Palestine, and it's a new generation of students who are currently being politicized by what is happening. And so one of our goals as SJP is to provide students with this political education and framework for understanding Palestinian liberation and struggle and building this mass movement that is sustainable and can actually last. So for us, this is teach-ins on, yes, also the conditions of apartheid and what is the conditions in the West Bank and the conditions in Gaza, but also connecting it to a global struggle against imperialism. Yeah, that's basically what we've been doing at the new school. Now that the semester is over, we're looking forward to getting started again. And yeah, just figuring out how best to organize all of our, how best to kind of like take all of this energy and this like raising of consciousness that is currently happening and sort of channeling that into different organizations across campus. Yeah.
Good afternoon, evening, yeah. Hi. My name is Shafie. I am a teacher, public school teacher here in New York City. And I've been incredibly honored to be asked to speak here at this.
Teacher voice.
Teacher voice, yes, hello everyone. You hear my voice stop once. There we go. Just kidding. So I'm incredibly honored to be speaking here on behalf of NYC Educators for Palestine, which is a group that sort of semi-organically formed out of the movement of rank and file educators, which is our social justice caucus within the UFT. Started a few years ago because we were not happy with the progress that was, or the direction, I should say, of our caucus in this particular, issue. The speed was slow. There was a lot of hemming and hawing, I'll say. But I understand that what it comes from is that, especially in left-leaning spaces, it's not necessarily from coming from a bad place. It's from extreme desire to make everyone feel heard and cared for. So, that's generous. Yeah, but so I think everybody wants to get it right, and that's how NYC Educators for Palestine started originally. And okay, so in the last 70 days, unfortunately, this issue is really come to a head. And the reason that we think it's so important for us as public educators to speak up about this is because this is within the hands of every one of our students in every one of our classes every single day. As Sherry was saying, you cannot avoid this. We have a sea change of information sharing in the world right now. I was sort of thinking, I think it was the first Gulf War when there was like a whole ton of media coverage of the, actual actions on the ground there. And the government afterward was like, ooh, you gotta pull that back. Let's play our cards closer to our chest. They don't have that option anymore. Our students are on TikTok every single day seeing both the extreme horrors of what is happening to the Palestinian people and the callous reactions of the rest of the world. And the callous, I don't know if y'all have seen the TikTok trends of people dressing up in Israel as if they were Palestinians sheltering from bombs and making raps about how they're gonna flatten Gaza. It is disgusting and insupportable. And these are what is shown unfiltered to our kids every single day. And so they're coming to us with these questions. And, there's definitely something to be said about keeping sort of a neutral tone in the classroom. But that is not where we're at right now. There is no possible way that the kids cannot make these connections organically themselves. To speak about this issue is to have those parallels be drawn by kids as young, it doesn't even matter how old they are. They go, oh, this reminds me of the things we're learning about in South Africa. This reminds me of my friend or myself who had to immigrate as a result of war, or hold on, I have some points. War, South Africa, new laws that have come up in the last few years preventing people from intermarrying between Palestinians and Israelis. Like, you can't not see that and go, oh, this is definitely the only democracy in the Middle East. Thank God it exists like that. It's bonkers, And then to see, that's just one aspect of it. Then there's, the police repression of protests there, police repression of people in general, kids having to walk through checkpoints on their way to school every day. And again, these are kids watching other kids experience this. So they come to us noticing these things. So we cannot possibly keep this out of the classroom. It has to be taught. And I'm hopeful that our generation, me personally as a millennial, born during Gulf War, then we had 9/11 and the Iraq War when I was in middle school. You had Occupy Wall Street. Oh, don't forget, there was also a very large action against the Palestinians when I was in high school. Occupy Wall Street, BLM, all of these movements that we saw sort of conflict and popular reaction to conflict. And so I think that this generation is seeing what's worked in the past. We're taking notes on the wonderful activists that have led us to this point from previous generations. And I'm not going to say that our nihilism as millennials is a great thing, but fuck it. You know what? Like, the sun is zooming in, we might as well fight a little bit harder, a little bit more full-throatedly for a better world. And people are saying, yes, they come for your jobs. There's so many ways that these conversations are getting repressed around our country, especially in academia. But the louder and more together we are, the stronger our voice will be, and the more courage it gives to other people to have these conversations and continue to speak out. So I feel myself hopeful that, it's going to keep moving in the correct direction. That's my phone, sorry. Yes, and then the other thing, connecting this to labor struggles, is obviously, people are coming together. Sorry, my brain went. I'm excited to see that labor struggles are coming together to speak on behalf of this issue as well. I am hopeful that maybe it'll take a little bit more time for the UFT and the AFT to come around. We just had an action on Wednesday trying to get Randi Weingarten to change her stance. She is very, very pro-Israel, unfortunately. And it's just not where the American people are right now. It's not what people know is to be right. It's an insupportable position. And you can also, seeing what's happening in Gaza, it is hard not to say that what's happening there will be here soon enough. The fact that within the last 2 weeks, we've had drones with guns patrolling outside of hospitals and shooting people who looked out the windows in Gaza. And not thinking that, at some point, maybe our mayor, who has already taken money out of the pockets of schools to buy robot dogs and a big, rolling robot for Times Square or whatever, that might be the next step. That facial recognition software that's everywhere is going to be starting to be used even more so to start repressing people, and that the social media, which we are all a part of in one way or another, you can see the censorship baked into it. Kids don't even realize that they know about it, but if you've ever heard a kid say unalived, it's because they know that saying the word killed themselves gets some algorithm somewhere to block their content. So kids know this without even having necessarily to have these conversations straight up. So they're gonna start seeing, when I post about this issue and my post gets seen by this amount of people versus when I post about Palestine and it's this amount of people, they are noticing these things already. And so I think it's important to keep having these conversations and keep making those connections between academia, between workers in tech, between public sector unions and the youth. That's the most important part. All right. Thank you.